Thank you very much, Sam. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. It's my pleasure to sit in front of you with Patt Hoffie. We're delighted to have her with us today. So for those of you who would know Patt's work, you know that it is pretty much impossible to sum up in a few sentences the immense contribution that she has made to artistic life here in Australia, but also overseas as well. Patt has been practicing as an artist for 5 decades, and her work has regularly explored themes of global politics and power. But what is notable about her work particularly is that she does this through the lens of human experiences, and she always does this with this wonderful sincerity and nuance. Recent exhibitions of Patt's work that you may have seen include the fabulous show This Mess We're In at QUT Art Museum in 2023, High Vis at Perth Tucker Regional Gallery in Townsville in 2022, and Timeline at Canberra Contemporary Art Space in 2021. And as well as exhibiting extensively in Australia, Patt has also undertaken numerous residencies overseas and has spent extensive time in Asia and in Europe. Patt is Professor Emeritus at the Queensland College of Art at Griffith University, and in 2018 she was recognised with a membership of the Order of Australia for her wonderful contribution to arts and education here in Australia.
Oh, thank you.
We're really delighted because in a few weeks we have an upcoming exhibition opening of Patt's work in Gallery 14 over at Quag. The show's titled, I Have Loved, I Love, I Will Love, and this exhibition will be presenting her first body of work in printmaking as an immersive installation. And in this exhibition, Patt is working in the context of a very long line of artists who have responded to human conflict and its consequences through printmaking. In this body of work, Patt has transformed scenes that she, like all of us, have witnessed in the media, and she has been laboriously committing these scenes to print in the hope that we might all be encouraged to view these images slowly instead of flicking past them so quickly that we have become accustomed to as our daily lives as participants in this overwhelming digital space. So to start off today, Patt, this recent work in printmaking began when you were invited to undertake a residency at Cobalt Editions at QCA by Dr. Tim Mosley, and this happened in 2024. Could I ask you, please, how this residency came about, and had you ever considered working in print before?
Thanks, Grace. And I just wanted to second your thanks to everyone here for coming and for the invaluable job that you people bring to these institutions, and how I believe that these institutions are absolutely pivotal to providing safe space for dangerous thinking. Thank you for that. And I would also like to say what a privilege it is for me to have been working with Grace for this time, for someone who's several generations younger than myself, but who's given me the kind of support I needed when this show almost started and stopped and came to a standstill on so many occasions. Grace's ongoing belief in the show and her quiet perseverance and support have been absolutely crucial to me. I count myself as very lucky.
Thanks, Patt.
Now,
Thank you. Thank you.
I came to answer the question directly. I was invited by Tim Mosley, who heads up the print department at Queensland College of Art and Design, to be an artist in residence there. Now, what that means is that you get free use of the studios when the students aren't there. So students are mostly there. So sometimes I was going in at night and doing bits and pieces. I'd never made prints in that way before, although I've had a couple of shows where I've included prints and held them here, even in the Queensland Art Gallery, especially with the first Gulf War. I was working on Canon laser copy prints back then. But as for the thing of monoprints, and what I've been working here is monoprints digitally reproduced afterwards and then back again, and also dry points. I'd never produced a dry point in my life before, and a dry point's cutting into the plate. Now, I'm still a dud, but what it allowed me was that it opened up a way of understanding the whole series of prints in terms of what it's been historically and what it means in terms of seriality, in terms of building up an image. So I started with that invitation with an idea in the back of my mind that I might do something on the environment, but it didn't actually work out that way.
No. And the subject matter that you went with was you were drawing from the online imagery of the humanitarian crisis that's happening in the Middle East that you, like all of us, have been seeing almost daily for almost 2 years now. What drove you to adapt these images?
It sometimes happens when you start making work that the subject matter makes its choice for you. I know that sounds contrary and perhaps almost naive, but those images that were flooding the airwaves and falling down into all our lives from end of 2023 were inescapable, and they delivered two messages. One of them was the extent of what was happening to the people who were far away, and the other one was the extent to which we as viewers were implicated somehow but unable to actually touch what was happening. So I was simultaneously given this barrage of information about my own impotency and a sense of a wall of grief, I guess, that the whole world was sharing. And so I couldn't make any other images for that period of time. I was working day and night, not until late at night. I'd get out of there at about 7:30, say, after the clean-up. But it was pretty relentless. And what I was thinking was this, one of the questions I was thinking, apart from what was happening over there, was we are so flooded with imagery today. It's a glut. Do we need the same visualisation? And to what extent is your role as an artist in adding to this a kind of pornography, just saying, oh, have a look at this too, have a look at this? The other question that came on, so this is a self-doubt question, a self-criticality question. The other question that I asked was, to what extent can art still retain a power to hold the viewer's attention for enough time to make us think about what we're seeing differently? The idea of flicking left all the time is so ingrained in most of us, especially the younger you are, that you think you see it, you get it, you brand it, you put it in your quiver of references. It's not something that perhaps before this slew of imagery was a different kind of response, where you would look at that surface for longer and maybe think a little bit more. Now, for me, with printmaking, the actual time that it took to build up the print was holding my attention. It's mark by mark, cut by cut, line by line. The other thing was that I felt that the processes of cutting, gouging, then pushing the print into the wounds, the bruising, the bleeding as you pulled it up, the surprise you get when you look at what you've got, because you're working blind in a sense when you're working with printmaking. Even if you're working on the back of the print with monoprints, you've got a vague idea of what you're producing, but when you pull it up, you think, whoa, and then you have to look at it again and you see ghosts, I guess, in the imagery. So I could go on about that for a long time, because the history of printmaking has always been associated with major changes in the way the world reflects itself back to itself. And you might want to talk a little bit about that history that goes back to, say, the 17th century and before, which has so often been twinned by the representation, the urge to represent crisis and warfare.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because around that 17th century is when we get that shift that's starting to happen in art making. You know, independent of this, we have this rise of ordinary people being depicted in art for the first time. And along with that, it means that a lot of artists are looking at conflict and they're looking at war, not in the lens of glorification or grand history painting, but they're looking at the nitty-gritty and its effects. You know, we have artists like Jacques Collot, who was in Nancy in France and, you know, observed the political turmoil that was happening around him and chose to commit to print, the series of atrocities that would be happening to local people, to villages, these sort of micro instances of that. And someone like Callow was really clear about making sure that these unflinching details were depicted. And, Goya is also another artist in his Disasters of War who, very much saw the medium. He took the medium incredibly seriously. He took this body of work incredibly seriously. He would actually recycle different plates from other series. He'd cannibalize other works. And what was going on around him was really inescapable with what was happening with the Napoleonic Wars in Spain at that time. And for him, it wasn't necessarily a case of people even immediately seeing them, because he didn't publish them during his lifetime. They were only published after his death. But he had what I think that you have described as this urge as an artist to be, I'm seeing this around me, what is my response? What do I bring to the table? What as an artist can I do? And that is to make work.
That's so interesting, Grace, because he did, you're right, held off, and his estate held off printing them till 30 years after he died. The thing that I thought about when I started looking at these social imagery depictions of what was happening elsewhere, I think this is unbelievable. I can't believe I'm seeing this. And then flick, you've got another image, and the next day you've got another slew of images. And I find that these things that I find so challenging could be forgotten within 24 hours or less. And yet I couldn't unsee a Goya. And I thought, why? Why were the images that I could remember from art history have such a capacity to involve me in a visceral way, or in a way that wasn't just a simple recognition? Mm-hmm. So I guess I started thinking about is there a time limit, a time thing involved in terms of putting time into the making of the work that actually registers and pulls back on you as a viewer to also give the time? I don't know the answer to that.
And it's really fascinating, because when we think about the role of the gallery in this modern digital era, it is one of those places where we are invited to spend time with images. And that's quite rare, I think, in the modern day and age. Through television or through social media, I've described this constant flick left. And your body of work is really raising questions about whether art can still hold that place, whether art can be this antidote to the fast viewing that we've all really become accustomed to in the digital era. And so I wanted to ask you, Pat, the site of the Art Museum has always been vital to society. Do you think we're now at a point where it's more vital than ever?
I think it is. I mean, we're in a room of people who'd be able to answer these questions better than most people, which is, have you noticed that people won't stand and look for as long nowadays as they did maybe in 5 years, 10 years' time? They want the quick look. You are the people who would notice that. And to what extent can you, or an artist, hold them in to that thing of the longer gaze, the longer think, the longer consideration? There's a lot of pressure, I think, in public institutions in Australia and around the world at the moment to not put on exhibitions that are contentious in any way. So we move towards exhibitions that are, what are they? Some of them are very pretty, acceptable, and saccharine, did I hear someone say? Yeah, and that's been really evident, I think, not only in visual arts galleries, but also in theatre, maybe not quite so much in literature, I've got to say. In the recent slow books we've had coming out of Australia, I think they're still pretty potent. But I believe that it's absolutely fundamental that art galleries hold on to the right to be these safe spaces for dangerous thinking. And what do I mean by dangerous thinking? I don't mean I mean, absolutely the opposite of social media thinking with that quick flick, where you think, I represent this and that's me, and anybody who's on that side, they're my enemy. No, it's much more complex than that. And the reason, to go back to your question, one of the things that starts you as an artist, started me as an artist in thinking about these, is that I can't work it out. I get a story from here and I think, yeah, but they haven't considered that. You go across it, nah, it's not. And the more you know, the more you read, the more you become involved, you think it ain't that easy to make your mind up about what's happening here. And one thing that art might be able to do, music, visuals, the written word, the performed word, is to make us realise that ultimately we've got a lot more in common than we do have differences, that solutions are never easy, but they're worth persevering back and forward, keep the dialogue going, keep the thinking fluid.
Yeah. And on that note, we are in this time of increasing polarisation, and the fact that this has come in the age of the internet, I don't think is a coincidence. And, this project prompts us to really reflect on these kinds of large-scale changes that we've seen over the 20th century, but into the 21st century as well, about how we make images, how we consume images. Portable photography, the rise of the internet, these things have had a really big impact on that. And, in line of how this exhibition has made you think about those themes and about how, the polarisation isn't the answer, have you found that there's been a shift for you in making this work, in how you actually look at images and digest them? Has this caused you to see things a different way?
I think that as a visual artist, you're always putting yourself through the mill. I don't know whether it's this exhibition or just as I get older, I realise I know less and less and less. And the more that I read, and now that I haven't been working for full-time paid employment for 10 years, I've devoted it, all my time now goes to my art. And it just pushes through to me about the layers of complexity mean that you're much less willing to say, look, this is my point of view. You have to give a provisional point of view, otherwise you're all sitting on the fence. So that might be something of an answer to your question.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, throughout your practice, I think about, and as you were saying before, your role in your art has never been to give a prescribed answer, this is what this issue is about, or this is my position, or even, this is what my work means. You're always someone who has really embraced that nuance.
Well, I hope so, and thank you. But this work's dangerous work, right? Because it could fall into easy categorisation until you look a bit deeper and say, no, that there's also this in there. But it's not my role to say how to think. If you do that, you're falling into propaganda. I want to be on the side of poetry rather than propaganda, sort of putting art forward as a platform through which you say, what do you think of this? That's what art's about. How does this strike you? The other big problem would be ever talking about something that's happening over there or even here that you don't have any direct experience with. But this exhibition and the way I've written about it in this book that will accompany the exhibition, will be available in the bookshop, is from a personal point of view, how this affects me as a viewer and the extent to which the onslaught of this visual media that we're living in affects our capacity to cut through and to reconnect with the material lives of those around us. So it's very much a personal thing. But like all art, if it was only personal, then you'd shove it under the bed. It's an invitation to think with other people and say, what do you think? You've got to be prepared as an artist that you get kicked in the teeth. And that is not, it's not a popularity contest. But it's about the art, ultimately. It's not about me. Once I get it out that door and up on that wall, the work either works or it doesn't.
And something that is really wonderful about this body of work, but also throughout your broader practice, is that it is so attuned to the contemporary moment, yet it represents and speaks this broader art history. It's really, really compelling. And this current body of work, as we briefly talked about, is richly attuned to this long, entangled history of print and conflict imagery. And, like we were talking about with Callow and Goya, some of the most serious topics throughout art history have been dealt with through print and done so with sincerity and with emotion. And I wanted to ask, are there any artists in particular for you or moments in art history that you hold close as really having influenced this body of work?
I guess what did rock me, that comes back to another thing you were saying before. What rocked me as I kept digging deeper and deeper into the readings about printmaking is that you think about the thing that changed the world so much, the invention of Gutenberg's printing. You got the Reformation, you've got people thinking, oh, look, I don't need to have someone between me and God, or me even in the interpretation of the Bible. I can read it myself, and the cheapness of this printed thing means that I have more power. Okay, that's one major thing. Let's move to another thing, which would be, and there's lots in between. I could go back into China, but just let's talk about the way in which print changes. The second thing would be the printed image through the photograph. And suddenly, again, artists think, what? No, I don't have to be a representative painter, really. So you spin off into the Impressionists and all other kinds of thinking. So photography changed the way we see the world and the way we can interpret that world. And then after that, you've got things like, for example, the computer and the computer print. And then during the first Iraq War, you've got computers being put onto the front cones of smart bombs. So that form of digital reproduction becomes a thinking instrument that is actually a tool of oppression, or it's a bomb. And there was never more visualisation of war than that war until now. And now we've gone into another form of print technology, which is the social mediatisation of print through everyday means. So you've seen the diminution of the press and, the uptake of war correspondents, many of whom are just ordinary punters with the photographs that they take. So every time we go through these, that's the thing that I think print's been so close to those incredible marches forward. And there's been a slew of stuff, poor Grace. I mean, I've got a slew of written stuff that I was digging down into the visual archives to read about responses from scholars in countries all over the world about the representation of war and the problematization of the representation of war, because it's very easy to fall into the category of sentiment or reportage, or it can fall into a lot of categories. But what it's got to do is also dig back down into history and the role of art as bearing witness to its own time.
Absolutely. And were you, with these kinds of, digging back down into history, is this something that, you had in the back of your mind when you started this residency about these print histories? Were they already at work in your mind? Or was it a case when you lifted and when you revealed the plate from the image that you could see, oh, I see this print here, and now I'm thinking about Goya? How did that happen?
It did happen in the studio because we're in a number of media, but painting, you're right there, you're on the canvas. There's nothing between you and the final image. What you've got in the print is this thing in between you and the image. So it's not direct. I could never have made any of these images through painting because the feeling would be too direct, and the painter or the artist's authorship would be written all over the work, if that makes any sense to you. It becomes your work more than if you have the print with the substrate and all those other processes, and I've got to say the community basis of the printmaking workshop. It's a very, very different thing. It's much more of a community-based thing. And to get back to your question, which was, did it make me think more? Yeah, it definitely did. I'd been aware of quite a bit, but it really made me drill down into the history of printmaking and that uncanny way that it has always been hand in hand with these crises. I was astonished about that. And the metaphorical impact of that, like I said before, cutting, gouging, scarring, wounding, bleeding, leaking, all that way of making that image is you press it in, you wet that paper, then you pat it dry, then you put that paper next to the plate, you put it under the roller, and the pressure is what feeds it into the fibres of the paper. Now, if you look at that paper side on with magnifying glasses like the conservators use, you'll see that they're like little shark's teeth. The burr in the plate presses into that soft paper for it to catch the ink. So they're definitely like little wounds, especially the first ones you pull.
Yeah, and you'll be able to see, a wonderful thing about this body of work is that Patt has used a mixture of analog and digital technologies, and the prints have been, and we'll touch on this in a minute, the prints have been printed to oversize, to life size, and in that, these marks that you can tell that Patt would have originally made become these huge bold lines and gestures. And as you can see in images like this, you really get that sense of the artist's hand, you get that sense of the scratchiness, which I think translates well to your subject matter. You feel it viscerally. You think it's very sort of related to the body. And just to go back on what you were saying about how the difference between print and painting, it struck me when you were saying that with painting, it's almost like you're the god of the image, you are in control of everything, whereas as printmaker, you're more facilitator of the image than God in a way.
That's a good point.
You're the midwife, I think, of the image point. Rather than the creator.
That's so interesting, because you, especially if you're a crap printmaker like me, you make a lot of mistakes, and you learn to look at these mistakes. You over ink, or you the paper might be overly wet, or you're too heavy-handed, and then you'll do something like, whoa, that's amazing, but it has so little to do with you. You're doing your very best. But there are, even with digital printing, you can get the ghosts in the machine that come out. And when I work with Nina White, who in the studio there to enlarge them, both of us are staring at some of those things, and you get a chance to see them as well. They come out and you weren't completely aware of them being there. Not always the case, but you go through a lot of rejects too. Like I've done hundreds of them, and there's very, very few that I've put into this show. And because it's in Gallery 14, I've exhibited in Gallery 14 before. The negatives are that you only get one small gallery space, but it's not a solo show. It's not about Patt Hoffie. It is a show about an idea. It's about something that says to you, what do you think about this? Is this working? And you only get to do that installation for a very short moment beforehand. It's not like an installation where you can put it up and you look at it a bit and you think, oh, it needs more of those. I'm going to go and grab more of those and put them up. Once you've got them through registration, that's it. You can't keep bringing things into that gallery. That show might not work. I'll tell you that straight. How can I say that? Because I've never I've never worked in that space to trial it. And the beauty of that space is that it's not a walkthrough. You have to go into that space and stay there. You go in and you come out the same door. So a lot of people will read the didactic, as you well know, and they'll take a look and then they won't even go in the room. You've got to somehow pull them into that room and intrigue them enough to look. And I think I've thought that through, but I don't know how successful I've been.
It's such a big leap of faith, this format. It really is. And when you were talking before about how you and Nina would, see different things and, have that faith about, the print's going to end up how it's going to end up. Something that I've noticed is that these prints, for many reasons, they encourage slow looking, as we've talked about, but they really reveal themselves to the viewer through this close viewing, through this repeated viewing. And Patt has in her work these sort of areas of concealment and areas of abstraction and darkness. And on the next slide, we'll have it close up here. And so was this sense of things being obscured and revealed a conscious part of the making? And do these aspects of the slow reveal continue to surprise you? Do you find yourself looking at the works and thinking, I didn't see that before?
Absolutely, that's true with these works. I'm drawn to the magic in art. And what do I mean by magic? I mean, if you really want to pull it to bits, go to Marcel Mauss, Mauss, phenomenologist, talking about the power of magic. And I don't mean... And Mauss traces magic as something that comes through the centuries as being more akin to the sciences. And what it is like that aha moment in science where you're working away on something and it'll spin off and you'll get a discovery somewhere else, that sort of thing. So it doesn't mean to say you can blunder on in the complete darkness. But if you've got all your cards in place and you've got a bit of skill, you keep up with history and you keep up with what's happening in the contemporary world, you've got a bit more chance of bringing those things or them leaching into the main event. You've got to be informed. You've got to be consciously informed. But as you keep making art, and especially if you're doing it day in, day out, things can bleed in that you're less conscious of, and they're really important. And that's what keeps you going. Because if you knew exactly this is me. If I was going to grid it all up beforehand, and there are artists that work that way, and that's fine. They get it and it's very popular at the moment, I think, where you'll get something that you've worked out beforehand on a computer, and then you either project it or you grid it up or you actually put the photograph onto light-sensitive canvas and then you fill it in. And people say, oh, that's so amazing, how come it's so real? That's a really impressive way to work. It's very much governed by a technological sort of eye. But for me, art's always been something that's taken me to places that I didn't know I wanted to go to, and sometimes I may not have wanted to go to. But that's what holds me in, because it has a joy to it, to find out things that you weren't prepared for.
And at the core of that is this idea of experimentation, this idea of play, and this idea in the faith of the process, that as that facilitator of the idea, you're invested and you have that faith to, in an outcome that can sometimes be uncertain. About that sort of, that process of working things out, something that we touched on before is the fact that these images in Gallery 14 will be at this wonderfully large scale. But, I've had the pleasure of visiting, Patt's studio spaces a couple of times, and I've seen initial proofs that are down at the intimate scale, and these images are equally as compelling in both scales. And I wanted to ask you, what was that moment like? When did you realise that these images could be big?
I thought that originally when I was offered a show at the Queensland Art Gallery, it was going to be a retrospective kind of thing, and I thought, nah. And then I focused on this, and I knew it'd be like an enormous task to get it over the fence, especially in Australia. I thought if I can get this one over the fence, I'll feel good about it, I hope. But just getting up there at the moment, it feels good. It's not up, but it's nearly up. It could still, the pin could be pulled. But I thought that as the space retracted, I thought if I can get the images up to almost human scale, they make a commanding presence. But as you people would well know, the other way that art can work is if it's very small, it brings you down to Lilliputian size, like with the absolute magic of, say, Indian miniatures or other small things I've seen throughout my life. Like there's a whole cosmology in those Indian miniatures, especially, and they glitter and they glow, and you enter that space. So I had to make the decision about how big to do them. I've done them at a range of scales. Some of them aren't huge, but I've culled them right back. But the big ones, I just thought you've got to confront people on their level. And I wanted it to be an immersive space so that the person who walks into that room is actually part of that whole installation. They are considered, because we are.
Absolutely. The viewer is that final piece of the puzzle that, comes in. And I believe, actually, a couple of you would have been there at the wonderful talk you did with Chris Sains, our director at the State Library a couple of weeks ago. I believe you were talking about the necessity of art to have that viewer, and I think you said something like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did it make a sound? Kind of like that with art as well, Is it doing its job if it doesn't have that viewer coming in as that witness? And so you have taken such care in thinking about how the viewer will relate to the work in the space and creating that space as an installation. Could you please talk a little bit, and not to give anything away or anything, but could you talk a bit, please, about the other materials that you've chosen to put alongside these prints?
Absolutely, thanks. It's a square room. It's almost a cube, right? Gallery 14. So, like I said, the thing it could be that people will, and this will still happen, read the didactic, have a look, and just not even go into the space. So, right in the middle of the space, I'm in the process of building a ladder, a series of ladders. I think there's about 35, 36 ladders, all black, with the same kind of linearity of some of these things. And they will go right up to the top of the ceiling and through a hole in the ceiling. And that will divide that room up into a thing where you have to walk around it. You'll be able to see the print through them because they're linear. But you'll have to walk right around it and come up closer to the print. So I thought that was one way to make that immersive space a thought capsule, if you like, if you're entering that thought capsule. There were other things I wanted to do, I'll tell you right now, which I wasn't able to do for various reasons. The gallery pulled the pin on it. But I'm just hoping that we can get enough mystery in the room that will pull people in to look at those details and think, how has this been made? What is this? Am I imagining I'm seeing this?
And the ladder installation is going to be incredibly compelling. And I'll just go through to find a couple of images. Here, for example, ladders are echoed, throughout many of Patt's images. We're used to seeing them in conflict imagery, ladders reaching over for, perilous rescues, but also this kind of degradation of the built environment that we're seeing. And it's incredibly disturbing, incredibly surreal. But something that I've also noticed when thinking about the ladders is that they sort of rise to the ceiling not as this kind of continuation of progress. They're not a ladder of progress, but it's this continuation of history, this continuation of chaos and mess. And I feel like it operates really strongly in that metaphorical area. Has those kinds of things occurred to you as well in thinking about the installation?
It's a really potent metaphor, a ladder. I mean, from Dante's Inferno, you've got the 3 layers. And you've got steps or ladders up there. You've got Jacob's ladder in the Bible, where Jacob was about to go on to the promised land, and they said, wait a minute, your wives and your kids can go across. You stay this side of the Jabbok, this side of the river for a bit. And then he had to wrestle with Gabriel for a long time and watch the angels descend up to heaven and come down again via these ladders. And then there's snakes and ladders. Look, I could go on and on. The ladder is a really potent form of symbolism, and I only wanted wooden ladders. Well, they're trying to get wooden ladders in Australia now. They're really difficult to get because occupational health and safety won't allow them. They're all aluminium ladders. Anyway, I would have had more ladders if I could, but you do what you can. So I think that everybody in this room would be able to bring another kind of metaphorical reading to ladders. And yes, they are in the works here and there. But it's also about the museum and the gallery and the extent to which a gallery is still prepared to open itself up to some risky business, and the extent to which viewers will put aside their thoughts about what they think they're seeing and be able to immerse themselves into maybe joining up with somewhere they haven't been to before.
Absolutely. And in that way, this, precarious vortex of ladders acts as this metaphor for, the project itself.
Yeah.
And for me, I don't know whether it's just because I'm a bit anxious around heights, but whenever I think about whenever I go up a ladder, I'm taking a leap of faith. And you're taking a leap of faith that this structure will support you. And so I could go on forever about the ladders. It is, I had a glimpse of them in the loading dock the other day. They look incredible. They've been, Pat's, had given them this incredible charcoal treatment, and it's going to be really, really something. So I can't wait for you all to see it.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. But sort of going back to the role of the artist in bringing all of this together, and in the past, something that's really stuck in my mind in your recent talks is that you've referred to this quote by the musician and vocalist Nina Simone when she's reflecting on the role of the artist. And she said, "An artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times." And this idea comes with this rich acknowledgement that art is not created in a vacuum, but it's deeply intertwined with the world around it. And it's talking to the present day, but it's also talking to history. And this is something that, in my mind, this exhibition undoubtedly does. It speaks to, the global chaos that we're in at the moment. It speaks to history, but it also is focused on thinking about your role as the artist and how you might be able to make a kind of valid response to these times, to counter this glut of images that we're seeing on a daily basis. Could you please tell us, how did this quote come into your thinking and what does it mean to you?
It is those things that you say that for me, art is a very potent way of, again, raising questions about this time that we live in and the relationship we have to it. There are different forms of art, of course. I used to say to students when I was teaching, the House of Art has many rooms. You can play in whichever one you choose. But I don't believe that there is any apolitical art. I think that all art somehow expresses its happiness with the world or the point of view of the person who created it. And I don't think that all art has to be unhappy or just about warfare. There's various ways of looking at it. But basically, our art in our culture is a way of us reaching out to each other to ask those questions together and to be a joining point rather than something that's going to put up walls and placards and divisiveness.
Absolutely. And in a lot of the statements that you've made surrounding the exhibition, that intention really sings through. And I really encourage you all to please go to the shop and pick up a copy of Pat's text. You'll be able to see in this book so many more detailed images as well beyond what we're showing in Gallery 14. So I really encourage you to pick one of those up. But in your writings around this show, you've reiterated your position as an observer, as an onlooker to this. And this work could have only eventuated from, Pat Hoffie seeing these images at that time of the print residency. And we've talked about this today already, but this is a really personal body of work. Do you think it's one of your more personal bodies of work?
I'm not sure yet. I might need time when I see it finished and to reflect on that. But, I have had a number of shows and written quite a lot about art and war over the last, say, 25 years. And I was fortunate enough to do a 3-year project, ARC project, with Caroline Turner, who was the deputy director who kick-started APT. Later on, Caroline went on to ANU, Australian National University in Canberra, and with other colleagues, we started a 3-year project called Art and Human Rights. And so we were dealing with conflict resolution and things like that way back then. So it's not like a new field of study to me. And I did do stuff that I think will be in, some were recorded that I was in group shows here with responses to, say, the Gulf War. But I don't know whether it's more personal. I just think that you take it in to the point where you're not quite sure about where the analysis stops. Because I always read, I always write, I always reflect. But in the end, you're not quite in full control of what you end up doing.
Yeah, and you are, such a prolific reader and writer, and I think my first introduction to you actually was through your writings before we met in person, and Pat has done an extensive amount of research around this topic, as you do with all of the topics that you address in your art making. And part of that research has raised questions about the role of galleries. And what we have in this show at the beginning of the didactic is this fantastic quote that Pat has identified from media theorist Boris Groys from 2006. And this quote talks about the importance of art institutions in this age of mass media. And so my last question to you before I quickly sum things up is, would you like to speak a little bit more about the role of the gallery in thinking about the importance of the art institution and the role of the guides as part of that?
Look, resources are tough, and, the idea of collecting costs a lot of money. And that's one of the things that these institutions do. And I don't think we should ever accept, oh yes, galleries should always be here. They're always if we don't look at them closely as people who support them, then there are plenty of people who'll cut the funding. So we've got to think carefully about what good they play, what role they play. And I think we've got to look at the whole range of things, I suppose. There's people who work in galleries and who defend galleries. But in coming to this body of work, through the last, what has it been, Grace? 12 months, it's got hotter.
18 months.
Yeah, 18, okay. Like it had started before that, but Grace and I started working together. It was very wobbly getting it to this point, yeah?
Yes, yeah.
Challenged. And, there's stories behind that, and they're ongoing. So the art doesn't start when you just get the materials and make the prints or the canvas and make the painting. The art is a lifetime job. The art is a verb. This is what I say.
Yes.
Art is a verb. Remember when we did grammar, a doing, being, having, and helping word. Doing, being, having, and helping, not a noun. A noun would stay on the wall, and that's very nice behind that lounge chair. Let me say something else. I am phenomenally successful in my lifetime and have almost sold nothing. I am such an unsaleable commodity as an artist. And so I don't, what do you do? I got a job for many years. I knew that wasn't going to be the way. So my idea is to get it up on the wall so that it can work. And of course, guess where I depend? Institutions to get it on the wall. Do I want it behind someone's lounge chair? I'd rather have people looking at it, thinking about it, discussing it. Yeah? So you build your life, which is a life of responsibility. But it's more difficult now, as I said in that last talk, for young artists and not so young artists to make a buck out of there or even survive. And I'm talking about top artists in this country living in this city. A lot of you would know them. They're scraping through, and guess what? Some of them aren't scraping through right at this moment. What you are not getting the money paid to the artist. A lot of the artists that have work, even in these galleries, are subsidising the shows on their own pocket. Now, I don't believe that you give, you shell out cash to everybody who's an artist. Everybody's got a hard enough time making a living. It's tough. But unless we can keep up the rationale about what these galleries do and what they can provide for people, we will get disseminated even just worse than it is now. So I depend on the work getting showed just to get the ideas circulating, and I do believe in the go. And as I started saying to you, you people are absolute keystones to that, and you're all doing it for nothing. And if you took away the volunteerism in Australia's art galleries, they'd all close.
Absolutely. And it's that reciprocal relationship between artist and institution is where art really comes alive.
Yeah.
And we're to our final minutes, so I thought I would quickly, I've given the summary slide, I'll quickly emphasise a few points that we've discussed today. In these prints, Patt is working in the context of this long history of printmaking that we've alluded to that sees artists using the medium to respond to war. And you know, as we've mentioned, beyond printmaking, there is this extensive history of art and war. So I'd really encourage you to you know, delve into that and read Patt's writings on the subject as well. It's a fascinating art history. And Patt is transforming in this body of work scenes that she and all of us have seen and witnessed daily on social media, on the nightly news. And these images are translated in the hope that we might become more accustomed to be able to take that slower viewing. And Patt is doing so through traditional, time-consuming methods of printmaking. And just to finish, I'll finish on emphasising the intention of Patt behind the series in her interest in considering whether this decelerated gaze required for thinking about art is still possible in our digital era, where we are just doing that fast flick left. And I certainly believe it is, and I believe the work demonstrates that in spades. Could everyone please join me in thanking Patt Hoffie?
Thank you.